You're thinking of buying a house? Joining me now with some advice on how to make your bank work for you is Bernard Hickey. How do you do that? For starters, make your bank work for you. Is now a good time to get a bank loan, a mortgage?
Well, now is a good time to certainly go to your bank and say, give me a better rate, because they've got plenty to lend. About 50 billion in cash. They just have
Where
sitting
did this
there.
money come from?
Well, they've been saving it up, just like the rest of us, and putting money aside after the global financial crisis. They've been a lot more cautious. And also, New Zealanders haven't been borrowing so much. They've got plenty in reserve, and they've got plenty of profits. So they're now out there trying to compete for your business. So if you're on a floating mortgage rate, and you're paying the advertised rate of 5.7%, you need to go to your bank right now and say, give me something much better, particularly if you're up to date with your payments and you've got plenty of equity, because they will give you 5.2, 5.3%, as long as you're a good risk, because they're very competitive right now.
I wasn't expecting to hear that, because with the economic crisis in Europe and the Greece going through another round of elections, I thought that would affect us, and it's not because of this surplus of cash.
Yeah, this time around, unlike when Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008 and everyone was worried about the economy going to a hell in a handcart, now things are a bit more settled, and also the banks have a lot more cash. They've been saving up, they've got a lot more capital, and lending growth isn't as strong as it used to be, so they've got plenty in reserve. They've also got plenty of profits. Their own profits have increased 30% in the last year or so.
So should we fix or float then at the moment? What are we taking a punt on?
Well, you have to make a decision about which way you think interest rates are going to go. Now, there are some economists who say interest rates are going to rebound next year, and therefore fixing may be a better bet. If you think interest rates are going to keep falling, or at least stay where they are, then floating is a better bet. Although it depends really on your own appetite for risk. And if you've been burnt by a big break fee in the past, you may be not so keen to fix for a long period. And in fact, most New Zealanders have shifted back from fixing to floating, because they want to take advantage of falling interest rates as they fall.
But falling interest rates obviously normally mean a poor economy as well. So we're taking a punt that benefits us, but overall could be a bad thing? Yeah,
well, that's the thing. If the economy gets really weak and unemployment goes up, that means people are a lot more cautious and they're not willing to borrow so much. It does mean, though, that interest rates fall. And it's a good opportunity for people who have maybe been paying quite high interest rates, 9, 10% in the past. Should they go on a spending spree with all that money, or should they repay the mortgage? Most people are choosing to repay the mortgage, and for the economy, that's a good thing, and actually for the long term, for New Zealand, it's good too.
What's the housing market like at the moment?
Well, surprisingly, in some parts of the country, it's pretty buoyant. So in Christchurch, obviously, and in Auckland, where there are both problems with supply, obviously the earthquake in Christchurch and leaky buildings and a lack of new building in Auckland, there's still quite buoyant prices. In fact, in both places, prices are back at their record highs.
Really?
But the rest of the country is still pretty subdued, particularly around Wellington, because of the cutbacks in the public service. And in the rest of the economy, provincial areas, there's in some places been a fall in population. People are moving to the big cities or moving to Australia, and that means the demand isn't so much. So patchy at the moment, but in some parts of the country, starting to look a bit warm. In some very small parts, particularly central Auckland suburbs, actually a little bit hot.
Is it true that expats are coming back from overseas to escape the global financial crisis and pushing house prices up and buying property, or not?
There are some New Zealanders coming back from the likes of London, Sydney, Melbourne, maybe New York. The trouble is, this time around, unlike in 2002, 3, 4, they don't have a lot of money. Remember, back then they were able to sell their fancy house in London,
True, yeah,
come back with a load of dosh, big strong pounds, and go ballistic in New Zealand. Now they maybe don't have so much money because the housing markets in London and in the States have dropped. Coming back from Australia, you're in a much stronger position because the housing market there is still, prices are still quite high.
Renting seems to be very expensive at the moment. If you're renting, should you possibly consider getting a mortgage and buying a house?
Well, for a lot of people, that does make sense. And certainly if you want to live in the house for a long period, that can be a great thing. And home ownership is excellent for stabilising your family, getting connected to the schools. It's a thing that people want to do. And so if you can, but be a little bit cautious, because remember, if interest rates bounce up from 5% to, let's say, 10%, which they have in the past, can you afford that 10% interest rate? Because most people think that at some point in the future there's a risk that it will get back up to 10%. So when you take on that mortgage, be really sure that, let's say someone loses a job or has to cut back on their work, Can they handle, let's say, an 8-9% mortgage rate rather than the 5% it's at the moment? That's the key. Also be a little bit cautious. You know, some banks say, hey, take out a 95%, 100% home loan.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine, but if house prices fall, then all your equity could be wiped out. So save a big deposit, as big as you possibly can. Be sure that whatever you're going to pay out is not too much. If you're a little bit stretched, someone loses a job or gets pregnant or whatever, you're not going to get wiped out. And that if house prices come off a bit, you're not going to be wiped out there. So be cautious, but it's a good idea to own your own home.
Very sound advice. I wish I'd listened to you 5 years ago. It's too late for me now. Thank you very much.
Cheers.